Norway. Norway runs along the western edge of Scandinavia. A slim country where mountains drop straight into deep blue fjords and islands scatter out into the sea. In the north, glaciers, cliffs, and long winters shape the land. While plateaus, forests, and softer coasts define the south. This was once the home port of Viking ships. Then a country of farm valleys and fishing towns, now linked by tunnels, ferries, and rail lines that cut through rock and over water. Energy from offshore fields and mountain rivers has built a modern, comfortable society. But most people still keep the outdoors close. On hiking trails, ski tracks, cabins, and boats. When you travel here, you move between colorful harbors, old wooden streets, and bright new waterfront districts filled with culture and design. Always with mountains, waterfalls, or wide open sea, just a short ride away. Coastal ships weave between islands, trains climb over high passes, and quiet paths lead to viewpoints where midnight sun, northern lights, or a simple clear sky turn the landscape into something you never quite forget. Stay with us to the end, to stand on one of Norway's most dramatic cliffside viewpoints hanging high above a long, still fjord. This is Norway, a place for space and fresh perspective, where water and rock meet you at every horizon. Oslo. Oslo lies at the innermost reach of a long fjord where wooded hills curve around a sheltered basin of water. From the air, the city is clearly constructed. Forested slopes, urban core, and a waterfront opening toward the fjord and open sea beyond. The harbor edge has become Oslo's most visible face. Modern cultural buildings, promenades, and marinas line the water, alternating with open public space. Boats glide steadily through the fjord, around islands that dot the water just offshore. Inland, the city spreads into distinct neighborhoods, historic districts, rail corridors, and residential zones framed by green hills. Forests press close to the urban edge, creating a sharp contrast between city streets and quiet woodland that remains accessible year-round. Oslo is Norway's primary gateway. From here, roads, rail lines, and ferries radiate outward toward fjords, mountain regions, and the rest of the country. For many travelers, it is the first encounter with Norway's landscape, where urban life, water, and wilderness meet in a single, legible frame. Kristiansand. Kristiansand sits at Norway's southern edge, where the Otra River loosens into a sheltered bay. And the coastline breaks into low islands scattered across the Skagerrak. The land stays gentle here. Rounded rocks, pale sand, pine forests, shaped more by water and light than by elevation. Long summer days stretch across the sea, and the city carries a brightness uncommon elsewhere in the country. The historic center follows a simple grid laid close to the water. Wooden houses and modest streets hold the scale of a town shaped for walking. While the shoreline opens outward into harbors, promenades, and open views toward the islands offshore. Boats move quietly between skerries, and the sea remains visible from almost everywhere, never far from daily life. Beyond the core, the city thins quickly into nature. Sandy beaches fold into shallow bays. Pine woods press down to the water's edge. Paths lead from neighborhoods to forest trails. Small marinas and swimming coves cut directly into rock. Hardangervidda National Park. Hardangervidda National Park is a broad, weather-beaten plateau stretched between eastern valleys and the fjord country. It is the largest continuous highland in northern Europe and Norway's biggest national park. Geologically, this is ancient ground, a weathered mountain surface later scraped by moving ice into shallow depressions. Lakes and bogs, with only low hills and ridges breaking the horizon. The tree line drops early. So much of the park is heather, sedge, and rock, with conditions closer to Arctic tundra than to the steep fjord walls to the west. Hardangervidda holds one of Europe's largest wild reindeer populations, along with other cold-adapted species that move across the plateau in step with seasons and snow cover. Archaeological finds and traditional paths show that hunters, traders, and later recreational travelers have used this crossing between east and west for thousands of years. Marked trails, Den Norske Turistforening, cabins, and winter routes now trace many of those lines. Bergen. Bergen sits between steep hills and a broad, sheltered harbor on Norway's western edge, facing directly toward the North Atlantic. Along the waterfront, rows of wooden buildings line the quay, their narrow profiles facing the harbor. These historic structures cluster tightly at the water's edge, forming one of the most recognizable coastal scenes in Norway. From the docks, the city climbs upward in layers. Houses step up the lower slopes, backed by dark green hills that frame nearly every view. Inland, the city opens into broader streets and public squares. Stone buildings, shops, cafes, and cultural venues create a compact urban center that remains closely tied to the harbor. Trams, buses, and foot traffic keep things moving on land, while ferries and boats constantly pull the eye back out toward the water. Above it all, the mountains remain omnipresent. Trails, lookout points, and the funicular lift rise directly from the city, offering elevated views over rooftops, islands, and fjords beyond. From Bergen, boats depart daily into surrounding waterways, treating the city as both a destination and a departure point. The result is a place where urban life, maritime activity, and dramatic landscapes stay tightly interwoven, defined as much by what surrounds it as by what stands within it. The Western Fjords. On Norway's western edge, the land breaks apart into deep fjords, carved directly into the mountains. Fjord pushes inland for more than 200 kilometers, branching into narrower arms where cliffs rise sharply from dark water and settlements cling to small strips of shoreline. This is Norway at its most vertical. The fjords compress distance and scale. Water replaces roads, mountains close in, villages appear suddenly, then vanish just as quickly around the next bend. Ferries glide beneath sheer rock walls. and waterfalls trace thin white lines from high plateaus down to the fjord surface. Steep slopes crowd the water, reducing the sky to a long ribbon overhead. The sense of enclosure is immediate and cinematic. Together, these fjords represent the geological heart of Western Norway. They are corridors through the landscape, shaping how people move, live, and see distance itself. Travel here follows the contours of rock and water, revealing a country defined as much by what is cut away as by what remains. Stavanger. Stavanger sits along Norway's southwestern coast, gathered around a calm harbor edged by low hills and open water. The city unfolds outward from the shoreline, with boats, quays, and open views shaping how you see and move through the place. Near the harbor, rows of white wooden houses line narrow streets that step gently uphill. Roof lines cluster, broken by glimpses of water between buildings. A stone cathedral stands nearby, its solid form marking the center of the old town, providing a clear visual anchor amid the lighter timber structures around it. Along the waterfront, the city opens up. Broad quays, promenades, and marina basins frame cafes, ferries, and visiting ships. Contemporary buildings appear here as well, their clean lines set against the movement of water and sky rather than dominating the scene. Street art, public spaces, and harbor paths add color and scale, giving the shoreline a distinctly walkable rhythm. Sandy beaches stretch south along the coast. Islands scatter offshore, reachable by short boat crossings. Inland, fjords cut deep into rock, and the land rises toward open plateaus and cliff edges. From Stavanger, these environments feel close and immediate, places reached within minutes, making the city a natural starting point for coastal drives, boat routes, and hikes into the surrounding terrain. Preikestolen and Lysefjord. South of the larger fjord systems, Lysefjord cuts sharply into the land, narrower and darker than the open western fjords. Its cliffs rise cleanly from the water, fractured and angular, giving the landscape a more severe geometry. High above the fjord edge, Preikestolen juts outward, a flat rock platform suspended over open space. The hike to reach it moves steadily upward through forest and exposed rock. This area compresses Norway's contrasts into a single frame: vertical cliffs and open sky, dense forest and bare stone, still water far below, and wind at the plateau edge. It is a place shaped by elevation and exposure. Lysefjord and Preikestolen form a natural hinge between coast and interior, a landscape that feels earned rather than entered, defined by ascent, edge, and perspective. Ålesund. Ålesund spreads across a chain of small islands where fjords narrow and open sea begins along Norway's western edge. Water threads through the town from every side, harbors, inlets, and short canals cutting between landforms shaped by tide and weather. The setting feels transitional, poised between sheltered coast and the wider Atlantic. After a single fire erased much of the old wooden town in the early 20th century, Ålesund was rebuilt almost at once. Stone and brick replaced timber, streets tightened, and the town took on a distinctive architectural character rarely seen elsewhere in Norway. Curved facades, towers, and ornamental details rise directly from the quays, their lines borrowing from waves, plants, and Nordic myth. The result is a compact townscape that feels sculpted rather than planned, decorative yet grounded in place. From above, Ålesund is a narrow ribbon of buildings stretched between water and water again. Bridges bind islands into a continuous whole. Mountains lift sharply behind the town, while low islands trail outward toward the Atlantic, creating a sense of enclosure without isolation. This geography gives Ålesund its role as a natural threshold, where inland valleys, fjords, and open coast converge. Jotunheimen National Park. Jotunheimen National Park is a sharper, more vertical mountain system in southern Norway, wedged between deep inland valleys, and marked by long ridges and plateaus rather than a single dominant valley system. The name means home of the giants, derived from Old Norse cosmology and applied to this region in the 19th century. And the terrain fits the label, with more than 200 summits above 2,000 meters. Glaciers over the ages carved out hanging basins, trough-shaped central valleys, and overdeepened lakes that now link together to provide most long routes across the area. Snow covers much of the park for most of the year, so hiking and hut-to-hut travel are compressed into a short summer window when the pass is clear and trail markers reappear. During that period, marked paths and a chain of staffed and self-service mountain huts enable multi-day trips to link the high crossings, side ridges, and valleys without entirely dropping back to lowland roads. Jotunheimen has been a national park since 1980, protecting a largely intact alpine landscape, reindeer ranges, and the headwaters that drain toward both eastern valleys and western fjords. Long-used trekking lines, ski traverses, and guiding services keep this home of giants tightly wired into Norwegian outdoor culture, treating these mountains as a central training ground for modern backcountry travel. Trondheim. Trondheim lies where a broad river bends into a fjord in central Norway. A compact city laid out on low ground with wooded hills climbing behind it. From above, the plan shows wide streets and orderly blocks radiating from the waterfront, a layout imposed after historic destruction from fires to open sightlines and reduce the risk of future destruction. The settlement began as a Viking Age trading port and royal capital, then grew into the main center of church power in medieval Norway, drawing artisans, merchants, and officials from across the region. Successive rebuilds layered wooden townhouses, warehouses on pilings along the river, and a large stone church complex at the core, so medieval stonework and later timber construction still exist within walking distance. Trondheim now functions as Norway's third largest city and a key junction where north-south rail lines, coastal shipping routes, and inland highways intersect. A major university and research environment anchors one side of town, shaping the population, housing, and street life with a high share of students and tech workers. For travelers tracing Norway by land and sea, Trondheim marks a natural turning point between the more densely settled south and the long stretches of coast and interior that run toward the Arctic. Rondane National Park. Way up, on a high, relatively dry block of mountains in inland southern Norway. Is Rondane National Park, where slopes step down through heather, birchwoods, and valley meadows. Created in 1962 and later expanded, Rondane was Norway's first national park, now covering about 963 square kilometers. It was founded to protect mountain landscapes, wild reindeer ranges, and old hunting grounds with stone-built traps. Waymarked routes and long-distance paths cross Rondane between valleys and passes, tying into hut networks and neighboring mountain areas used for multi-day trekking. At the same time, a main road follows the western edge as a designated scenic route, giving sustained views into the protected area and turning the same set of plateaus and summits into both a walking landscape and a scenic inland drive. Bodø, just above the Arctic Circle. Bodø sits on Norway's northwestern coast where the land meets the open sea, scattered with skerries and long, pale beaches. Mountains rise just inland, framing the city with a sense of scale that's unmistakably northern. From the waterfront, views stretch across shifting light, weather, and water. Midnight sun in summer, deep blue twilight in winter, making Bodø feel closely tied to the rhythms of the Arctic. Much of the city has a clean, open feel, shaped by post-war rebuilding and wide harborfront spaces. Contemporary architecture, like the glass-fronted cultural buildings and coastal promenades, create room to linger, walk, and take in the scenery. The result is a town that feels uncluttered and connected to its surroundings rather than pressed inward. Bodø is also a natural gateway to some of northern Norway's most dramatic landscapes. From here, ferries and boats fan out toward the islands of Salten and onward to Lofoten. While nearby you'll find powerful tidal currents, coastal hiking routes, and easy access to mountains, beaches, and wildlife. Within the city itself, galleries, public art, and Sami cultural influences add depth and character, giving Bodø a creative energy that feels intimate, outdoors-oriented, and distinctly Arctic. Lofoten Islands. The Lofoten Islands stretch out into the Norwegian Sea as a broken chain of peaks and narrow land bridges well above the Arctic Circle. Mountains rise sharply from the water, steep and angular, leaving little flat ground between sea and summit. From the air, the island's red is a continuous spine of rock, interrupted by fjords and pale arcs of beach. Fishing villages sit where land briefly relents. Clusters of red and white buildings balanced on stilts or tucked into small harbors. Roads thread between islands over bridges and causeways, keeping water in constant view. The scale feels compressed, dramatic relief paired with short distances where a turn in the road can shift the entire frame from sheltered fjord to open ocean. Despite the latitude, the light here is soft and reflective. In summer, the midnight sun stretches low across beaches and water, flattening shadows and intensifying color. In winter, snow sharpens the contours of the peaks and villages, while storms move quickly across open sea. These conditions give Lofoten its unmistakable visual signature: high contrast without harshness, drama without density. Tromsø sits high above the Arctic Circle, spread across a narrow island between fjords and steep mountain ridges. Bridges and tunnels connect it to the mainland, but from almost every angle the city is surrounded by water, peaks, and sky. Snow-covered mountains frame the horizon, while the harbor stays active year-round beneath shifting Arctic light. Latitude shapes life here. In summer, the sun circles without setting, casting long shadows across rooftops and water late into the night. In winter, daylight thins to a few blue hours before darkness returns, creating ideal conditions for northern lights that ripple above the city, mountains, and fjords. These cycles visually define Tromsø, and they are among the most filmed phenomena in northern Norway. The city grew as a northern outpost tied to the sea and exploration. Sami presence across the region predates the town itself, and coastal settlement later turned Tromsø into a base for Arctic travel, science, and trade. That history shows up in the mix of boats in the harbor, research vessels alongside fishing craft, and in museums and cultural sites that sit close to the waterfront. Visually, Tromsø alternates between compact urban blocks and open Arctic space. The harbor, bridges, cathedral, and waterfront streets are set against mountains that rise sharply just beyond the last buildings. From the city, roads and boats lead quickly outward into fjords, across islands, and toward open sea, making Tromsø feel like a small city held between water, mountains, and light at the edge of the Arctic. Odda. Odda sits at the head of a narrow branch of the Hardangervidda, where steep valley walls press close to still water, and mountains rise immediately behind the town. From the fjord, the settlement appears compact and contained, framed by slopes, waterfalls, and hanging valleys that funnel inward from all directions. Just beyond the waterfront, the landscape takes over. Sørfjorden stretches south in a quiet ribbon between orchard-covered slopes, while north of town the valley opens into a corridor of waterfalls and rock faces. Lodfossen drops directly beside the road, twin streams crossing beneath a stone bridge, and nearby valleys lead toward glaciers, lakes, and high ground shaped by ice and meltwater. Above Odda, the terrain lifts quickly toward exposed plateaus and cliff edges. The route to Trolltunga, translating to Trolltung in English, climbs through mountain valleys and open rock, ending at one of Norway's most striking viewpoints, a horizontal ledge suspended high above deep water and distant peaks. From below, lakes and sheltered fjord sections offer calmer perspectives, with kayaking routes tracing the base of the same dramatic terrain. Wildland. Clean design. Ancient history. Norway holds it all in one breathtaking line. This is Norway.